Sachas Bava Kamma Daf Mem Zayin. It contains one Mishnah from the beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah. The Gemara is finishing off some halachas that Rava has said about a hezek that happens to a pregnant cow and how the vlad is considered with regards to the nezek you need to pay. Then we'll start the Mishnah, which discusses if you bring objects into someone else's property with or without permission, how that affects your chiyuv in different types of ways. Who was mazik who, and how you'd be chayiv for that. So let's begin. Rava says a halacha based on the Mishnah which we saw before, that if a hezek is caused to a pregnant cow, you need to pay for the mother and the child, the vlad, if it was miscarried. So says Rava, you don't evaluate the two of them separately. You don't evaluate the value of the mother and separately the value of the vlad, because that would be too great an expense. Instead, you look at the entire pregnant cow as one, and then you calculate how much is it worth now that it has miscarried, if it itself is alive or damaged or injured, whatever it is, and you value it as one. If you were to separately look at each individual, it would be valued too high. Now, Rava says you find the same halacha in other things. If you were to cut off the hand of an eved, you need to pay him for it. Again, you don't evaluate how much the eved's hand is worth, meaning how much you would pay to agree to have your eved's hand cut off. You don't evaluate it that way because that would be too much money. Instead, you evaluate the value of the complete eved with the hand and the complete eved without the hand and pay the difference. Similar thing you find if you are mazik fruits growing in someone's field. You don't evaluate the value of just those fruits or the value of the row that those fruits grow in. Instead, you look at an entire base a larger portion of land of that entire field, and you evaluate how much is it worth with these fruits and how much is it worth without it. These are the three halachos that Rava says to lessen the amount that you need to pay, the amount that the mazik needs to pay. So the Gemara asks, Rav Acha Breder Rava asked Rav Ashi, why are we being lenient on the mazik? It seems like the ikar halacha, the real halacha, should be that you evaluate it individually and would have to pay a high amount. But because it's too high, we decide to be lenient on him and lower it by evaluating a larger area. Why do we want to be lenient on the mazik? That's not the halacha. So the answer is no, it is the halacha. It's the main halacha, because the mazik is able to say, my ox gored your pregnant cow. Let's evaluate a pregnant cow. The pregnant cow, how much is it worth now? And therefore, the bottom line is the same. Now, the Gemara brings another halacha, and that is, again, about evaluating the value of a pregnant cow. When we give a number to the value of the cow, so there's two possible ways that the pregnancy could increase the value of the cow. One is if it's fatter, and the other is if it just looks larger because it's swollen with the child. So the Gemara says that the fatter, that belongs to the owner of the cow. If the cow and the vlad inside it are owned by different people, that extra value of the mother being fatter belongs to the owner of the mother, not to the vlad. The vlad doesn't get credit for the mother being fatter. However, if the value goes up by the size, just the appearance and size of the mother, because of the vlad, so how do you evaluate that? So the Gemara brings opinions here. So the Gemara says, Rav Papa says it belongs to the owner of the cow. It's all her credit. And Rav Acha Breder Ravika says you split it. And the halacha is, says the Gemara, you split it. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. And this discusses four cases actually. What happens if you bring property into someone else's rishos? So there's going to be a machlekes in all of them, and generally we're discussing three halachos. What happens if the owner of the rishos causes damage to the person who brought it in? What happens if the owner of the rishos is damaged by the person who brought it in? And what happens if the person had rishos and he either causes a damage or he is damaged? Now, at the root of all this is when you give someone permission, does that mean that you're accepting responsibility? If you allow him to come into or to bring something into your rishos, does that mean you're accepting responsibility for something that happens to him? And there are different levels of how much responsibility you could be accepting. You could be accepting responsibility for what you did to him. You could be accepting responsibility as to what happens to him in general. The Gemara will discuss all these things. So let's begin the Mishnah. The first case is a case of regal. Someone owns a lot of pottery and he brings the pottery into someone else's rishos. So if he brings in without permission, he is responsible for whatever happens. If he causes damage to the owner of the rishos, he needs to pay for it. If he himself gets hurt or damage, the owner of the rishos is not responsible to pay for it. Now, if he brought it in with rishos, then the owner of the chutzner is responsible for what happens to the pots. Next is if he brought fruits. Here the same halacha. If there was shalei b'rishos without permission, then the one who brings it in is responsible for the damages that he causes to the owner of the rishos, and he's not going to get paid for a damage that happens to him. However, if he brought it in with rishos, then the owner of the rishos is going to need to pay him. And again, the seeming implication there is that the owner of the rishos, by allowing him to bring it in, takes responsibility for the damages that happened to him. Now, the next case is if he brings in a shar and it causes a goring attack. So again, if it was shalei b'rishos, then the owner of the shar is responsible for everything. He would need to pay for any damage the shar causes. He does not get paid for something which happens to the shar. And if it was b'rishos, then the owner of the chatzah would be responsible for what happens to him. Here we have another case in that if there is a hezek caused by the bar, that's if the shar falls into a hole. So if he damaged the hole, as there was water in there and he ruined the water, or if there was people in there and he killed them, so he'd be responsible to pay for the damage to the bar as well as to pay kafir for the people that he killed. However, if he was brought in with rishos, then the owner of the chatzah would be chayiv. Okay, so all these cases are the first opinion. Rebbe argues on all of them, and he says with the owner of the rishos, if you bring something in, he did not accept responsibility for it. Unless he explicitly accepts responsibility, he's not responsible for anything that happens to the person who brought it in. So all the things where we said that if he's brought in rishos, then the owner of the yard, the owner of the chatzar, is chayiv for that. That's not true. Rebbe disagrees with all that. Now, we now begin the Gemara. The Gemara makes an interesting diuk in the first halacha of the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that the owner of the kideiros, or the fruits, whoever brings things in without permission, is chayiv for the damage that they cause to the owner of the yard or to his property. Now, the implication of that is that had he brought it in birishos, had he had permission to bring it in, he would not be responsible for the damage that he would cause to the owner of the yard or to the property that he has there. Now, the Gemara asks, why not? If you're telling me that anyone who brings something in with permission, anyone who does something with permission, is accepting responsibility for what it causes, so then even if the owner of the pots of the fruits brings them in birishos, he should still be accepting responsibility for what happens. So if his pots or his fruits then went and caused the damage to the owner of the yard, he should still be responsible for that. This sounds like that this implication, this halacha, is not the Bava Kamma. It sounds like Rebbe. Rebbe's the one who said that if you do something birshos, doesn't mean you accepted any responsibility. So that's what we seem to be saying here. On the other hand, we said that if the owner of the yard allows the person to bring it in there with rishos, then the owner of the yard is accepting responsibility for what happens to the property of the person who brought it in because he gave him rishos. So we have a contradiction. We have Rebbe's halacha at the end. Rebbe says his halacha. We have Rebbe's halacha in the beginning, where we say that the owner of the kideiros and the fruits is not responsible for the fact that he brought them in with rishos. But in the middle, we have the halacha that the owner of the yard is responsible. He is accepting responsibility automatically for what he allows b'rishos. So it's a contradiction. The beginning and the end are Rebbe. In the middle seems to be the Rabbanan. That's the kasha that the Gemara asks. So the Gemara gives two answers to this. The Gemara quotes Rabbi Zeir, who says it's different opinions as to what Rebbe holds. It's a machlokes tanaim as to what Rebbe holds. And you're right, different people said different parts of this Mishnah. Rava said, no, it all fits with the Rabbanan. Until we say that actually Rebbe's shita, that's not what's happening over here. This is the first part. The diuk that we made is not Rebbe's shita. The diuk that we made is different. Even the Rabbanan would agree to that. And the reason is because there is a difference between the owner of the yard allowing you to bring something in rishos and bringing your own things into his property with rishos. If the owner of the yard allows you to bring something in, he's accepting rishos for whatever you bring there. But if you take your stuff into his rishos, it doesn't mean you're taking responsibility for all of his things. And the owner of the yard brings responsibility. He allows you to bring things in. He's watching it. The expression Rava uses is even if it should be destroyed by the wind, he's taking responsibility for that. He's saying, bring it into my yard, I'm going to watch it. But if you put your fruits in somebody's yard, so you're responsible for everything that happens in the yard, that's not logical, and therefore there is no responsibility there. Okay, next sugya. The Gemara discusses when we said that a person who brings his fruits in shalei b'rishos is responsible for the damage that they cause to the Baal HaChatzar. Let's say if his animals are hurt by those fruits, so the one who brings them into Rishos is responsible. So the Gemara says, what type of injury was caused? So Rav says it can only be that he slipped on them. And because that's inevitable, by bringing your fruits in, you created a hazard, and the owner of the property lost money because of you, so you need to pay for that. However, let's say the guy's animal ate the fruits, and he ate too much of them, and he got sick. So you're not responsible for that. That's his own property. That's his own problem. He shouldn't have eaten so much. So that's the halacha that Rav said. So Rav Shesha says, it sounds to me like Rav said it when he was half asleep, because it contradicts the Brisa. The Brisa says, if somebody puts poison in front of his friend's animal, he is pater b'dinei adam. The fact that the animal goes ahead and eats the poison, you're pater for it, because it's not something you should have eaten. You should have known not to eat that. However, b'dinei shamayim you're chayiv. So the Gemara says the implication is the reason you're pater is because animals don't normally eat paint thinner or bleach or whatever it is that you put in front of him. However, if it would be fruits, he would normally eat it. You'd be responsible even in Dinei Adam. So that doesn't fit with what Rav said, that you're not responsible because he should not have eaten it, and he should not have eaten so much. So the Gemara says, no, the diak is wrong. What really you should be medayik is not that if the animal eats fruits, he would be chayiv even in Dinei Adam. It should be medayik the opposite. And we're saying a chiddush, that even though the poison is something he normally doesn't eat, you're still responsible in Dinei Shamayim. But that you'll be responsible if he eats too many fruits. Certainly you're responsible for that, both for fruits and for anything else, because you cannot blame him for having eaten the fruits or the poison or whatever it is. Again, the chiddush is that even for poison, you're responsible even in Dinei Shamayim. Second answer is here when we said poison, we're talking about fruits. We're talking about a type of fruit which is poisonous to the animal, but it's normal that he would eat it. And we're saying that you're pater b'dinei adam, even if it's something that he normally would eat. Okay, now the Gemara has a few more kashas on this halacha of Rav. So the first kasha is a brisa that says if a woman went to grind her wheat in somebody's property, she went to borrow somebody's mill, and she did without permission. She brought her grain into someone else's rishos to use the mill without permission, and the person who owns the mill, his animal went and he ate it. So he's pater for having eaten the woman's grain. She didn't have permission to bring it there. But if he was injured, then he's chayiv. And here the expression that's used is im huzka, if he was injured. So then the woman who brought the grain, she's chayiv for that. So the Gemara's kasha is why? Same thing. Maybe he should not have eaten. It's his own responsibility for eating. According to Rav, he shouldn't be chayiv for having eaten too much. So Gemara says, why do you think he ate it? How is this any different than what Rav said in the Mishnah is that he slipped on it instead of eating it? Here also, he slipped on it instead of eating it. So Gemara says, that's a good point. What's the havamina? Why did we even ask the kasha? Why did we assume that it must have meant that he ate it? So Gemara says, because the expression is slightly different here. In our Mishnah, it said, if he was injured by them. That implies that he was injured on them, that he slipped on them. But here, im huzka sounds like it's a continuation of the sentence before. The sentence before said that if the owner of the yard's animal ate it, he's pater, and if he was damaged, then he's chayav. That means that it's referring to the eating that he did. That's the simplest understanding, and that's why we assume that it's referring to where he was injured by the eating. So the Gemara, no. The other one says, no, the pshat is not that. It's not connected to before. One has nothing to do with the other. It's referring to where he slept. Okay, next ayah the Gemara brings. It's from a brisa that says if somebody brings his ox into someone else's yard without permission, and he eats grain, and he gets sick from it, and he dies, he's pater. However, if he was brought in brishos, then the owner of the chatzar is chayiv. So again, the Gemara asks, why is the owner of the yard chayiv? Because he allowed someone to bring his ox into his yard and he ate too much, so much that he died. You should say the same thing. He shouldn't have eaten so much. So Gemara says, what do you mean? How could you compare that case to this case? Our case is where he went in without permission. Over here is talking about where the ox came in with permission. If you gave permission for somebody to come into your shows, then you're responsible for whatever happens to him, even if he strangles himself. You're responsible. Our case is where he came in without permission, and the owner of the yard, his ox, ate that guy's stuff. So you never accepted responsibility on it, just like we said before, Rava's pshat. You never accepted responsibility on when you brought your stuff in. You didn't take responsibility for what happens to him, and therefore you'd be pater on that. Okay, Gemara now starts its next sugya. What would be the halacha if he explicitly took responsibility? Now, according to the Bava Kamma in our Mishnah, anytime you allow rishos, you're taking responsibility. According to Rebbe, you have to explicitly take responsibility. But in a situation where you took responsibility, you gave someone rishos and you took responsibility, you're responsible only for your stuff causing a damage, or you're responsible in general? You're saying, bring your ox, let's say, into my yard, and I'll take full responsibility, not just of my animals damaging him, but of any type of thing happening to him. So that's the first question. So I want to bring a riot from a brisa that quotes Rav Yehuda Bar Simoin in a discussion in a Masechta of Nezikin of Karna. And the case is as follows. If somebody brings fruit into somebody else's yard, so the brisa says that if an ox comes from somewhere else and eats them, he's pater. It doesn't say who's pater. He's pater. But if you brought it in Bereshos, he's chayiv. So where it says pashtus is, who, when we say he's pater and he's chayiv, what are we referring to? We're referring to the owner of the yard. Right? Because we're saying Bereshos or Shalei Bereshos. He's the one who gives Bereshos. And it says that if it's brought in Bereshos, then the owner of the yard is chayiv. So you see, he's taking responsibility even for a damage that comes from somewhere else. So in that, the Gemara answer is no. In pater and chayiv, we mean the owner of the ox who came from somewhere else, and he ate it. So that's what we mean. If it was brought in bereshus, then the owner of the ox is chayiv, and if it was brought in shalei bereshus, then the owner of the ox is pater. So Gemara says, what do you mean reshus shalei bereshus? If we're talking about the ox came from somewhere from the street. What does that have to do with being brought into the chatzar bereshus or without bereshus? The Gemara says very simple. If you bring it in bereshus, then it's considered to be like it's your yard. The owner of the yard gave you permission to bring things in there. So then it's chatzar hanizik. Now we know that the halacha of shein is that you're only chayiv in chatzar hanizik. So then the ox that came from somewhere, his owner is chayiv because it was bereshos, it's chatzar hanizik. If you didn't have permission to bring it there, then you don't have permission to be there any more than the owner of the ox has permission for his ox to be there. So the two of you have equal rishos there. It's rishos harabim as far as this halacha is concerned. Not real rishos harabim, as far as the two of you are concerned, it's public domain. You both have equal rights to the space. That being the case, it's a halacha of shein in rishos harabim, where the halacha is that you're pater. There's no chiyah for that. So that's why if it's shalei bereshos, you're pater. The Gemara follows up by asking, though, and now we're already deep into Daf Mem Ches. Then we're asked, so we have another writer which is the exact same case, except we're talking about Karen, we're not talking about Shane. And the Gemara quotes the Bryson has the same discussion in brief. It says that if someone brings his shor into someone else's rishus, and another shor comes from somewhere else and gores it and damages it, so if he brought it in without permission, then he's pater. But if he brought it in with permission, then he's chayiv. Then we're again asked, whose permission, who's pater and a chayiv? What are we referring to? Obviously, if we're talking about permission, we mean the owner of the chatzar. And you see clearly that if he gave permission, then he's responsible for the attacks, even from a shor that comes from somewhere else. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about the owner of the shor who's responsible for it. And the Gemara says, but this time, you're not going to be able to tell me that permission means the permission of the chatzar, and the reason that's important to the owner of the shor is because now it makes it rishos hanizik, because Karen doesn't make a difference rishos harabim rishos hanizik. Karen is chayiv even in rishos harabim. So what then does this mean? So Gemara says we're talking about the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, who holds that Karen does make a difference if it's rishos harabim or it's rishos hanizik, because Rabbi Tarfon holds that Karen in chatzar hanizik pays nizik sholem. In Rishos Harabim he pays a chatzin nezek, but in Rishos HaNezek it's nezek shalem right away. And therefore we're saying with chayev, we mean that he pays nezek shalem because it was brought in Bereshos, so therefore it's considered to be chatzar nezek. If, however, it was shaloi Bereshos, then he brought it into what would be an equal Bereshos for either of them, and therefore it's considered Rishos Harabim, and he only has to pay chatzin nezek, and that's what pater means.